injustice particularly in Central America. And of course, when I was doing that work, those were the hot years in Central America. But at the root of a lot of those conflicts were conflicts coming out of the pattern of agricultural development. So this has always been kind of in the background of my interest in the slow food movement, even though now there's a quite different focus. I assume you're looking at my title slide at the moment, and I would just take a moment to explain that illustration, which is actually in my office here. That is a small metal sculpture that came from Italy, and in front of it is a snail, which is the emblem of the slow food movement for obvious reasons. So that's just a little aside on the, just a second, I get my slides together there. Just an aside on the artwork. All right, so what am I going to talk about today? I want to introduce you to slow food. Some of you may have heard of it. It has been around for quite a while, and it does have a local presence, as you will note later on. I want to talk about it as a evolving social movement from its early days to its present configuration, and then focus on some of the large-scale initiatives that slow food has undertaken and give you some examples of slow food in action. Finally, at the end, I'll talk about some of the criticisms of the movement and then provide a little bit of a conclusion. All right, so what is slow food? Slow food is a social movement. It is a global social movement. And by the way, I have more text on the slides than I would normally do in a presentation, but I wanted the slideshow to be able to be a resource that can be used later on. So if the slides seem busy text-wise, that's just because I wanted it to be something you can actually read later if you want to. I want to emphasize this notion of being a social movement. Social movements are collective effort to challenge established authorities in one area of life or another, and act outside the normal boundaries of participation. Those elements together define what social movements are and how you can recognize one when it's in front of you. Slow food is a global social movement as it has emerged, and it didn't start this way, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment, but it has come to challenge industrial food systems globally and excuse me, try to promote change in the production, distribution, and consumption of food in ways that are environmentally sustainable, culturally appropriate, healthy, and socially just. And for the philosophers present, I should say ethical as well. Excuse me. It was established in the late 1980s in Italy by a small group of political activists, and I'll give you their specific motivation in a moment. But and you're looking at that small group of activists there in that photograph, which is from the late 1980s in Italy. But it has now grown to encompass a vast network of groups and projects with hundreds of thousands of members in more than 160 countries. So that is pretty much the definition of a global presence for this movement. The specific beginning of slow food is what actually gave the movement its name to start with. It was born out of an Italian opposition to fast food, and that might seem obvious, but that was a specific motivation. And it was specifically opposed to American fast food, which in the 1970s and 1980s rapidly expanding outside of its home base in the United States. Burger chains, pizza chains, taco chains, etc., fried chicken chains. In fact, the story of Kentucky Fried Chicken in Japan is just as fascinating as the slow food in Italy story. But Italy was particularly resistant to the expansion of American fast food restaurants because of the nature of Italian cuisine. Italian cuisine is very local, very regional. In fact, people in Italy don't talk about Italian food. They talk about the food from their particular areas. And so the arrival of fast food restaurants challenging the multitude of small food enterprises everywhere throughout Italy was resisted. And so Italy was slower to embrace American fast food, although inevitably with globalization proceeding and tourism growing and people patronizing such establishments, the chains did spread throughout Italy. But the specific beginning of the story takes place in Rome, where in 1986, as you can see there, McDonald's said that it was going to open a restaurant in the Piazza di Spagna, right next to the famous Spanish Steps. And I don't know how many of you might have visited Rome, but if you have, you almost certainly have visited the Spanish Steps, which are one of the most iconic historical spots in Rome. And so the idea that there would be an American fast food restaurant right next to it was galling to a number of people. And so they organized a demonstration where it was being constructed to oppose it and try to block it. They were unsuccessful, and in the photograph on the right below, you can see the actual McDonald's that opened up. Might look relatively unobtrusive, but actually it's huge. It's a two-story McDonald's. It's one of the largest McDonald's in Europe, or at least it was at the time. While the demonstration generated some press and so forth, ultimately the restaurant did open and is there to be visited if you are in Italy and feel the need for that kind of food. So that was a failure, but it actually, whoops, did I get too far here? No, okay. Sorry. The movement did get itself organized, and before I talk about how the movement got started, I want to just mention the importance of charismatic leadership, because social movements, which depend on voluntarism, rarely are well funded or have many resources to start with, and confront powerful interests. It really needs a boost to motivation to get people involved and to sustain their involvement beyond, let's say, a demonstration or attending a meeting or something like that. And so charismatic leadership, which is important in all sorts of political contexts. For any of you that have studied social science, I'm sure you've encountered Max Weber's emphasis on charismatic leadership as politically significant. And the slow food movement has a particularly dynamic leader who is definitely charismatic. He is indefatigable. He travels all the time, attends meetings throughout the world of slow food activities and conferences and so forth. And he has been going for 35 years now at the head of the organization. On the left, you'll see a photograph of him at the upper top as a younger man. Below, on the right, is a photograph of him in more recent times. But he is clearly a force and is essentially the face of the slow food movement for those that are involved in it. And I'll have cause to mention him again in a moment. But at this point, I want to talk more about the various characteristics of the movement and what it has gotten into. So in the first bullet here, this is how slow food got started. It was opposition to fast food globalization in defense of local and national cuisines. And it's worth noting that this is a period of time, the late 1980s, early 1990s, when globalization became a major political subject throughout the world, and large-scale movements opposing the various aspects of globalization got their start. So that undoubtedly had some resonance for how the slow food movement was able to then grow and develop. The next phase was going beyond just opposition to recognizing that there were particular foods that were in danger of being displaced by the expansion of industrial food systems and global commodities, whether it be in the form of fast food or in the form of packaged foods and brands from the largest firms throughout the U.S. and Europe and elsewhere. So the movement took on the idea of identifying and publicizing particular foods that were endangered by this pattern of expansion. From there, they widened their scope to really start to look at the global food system per se, and in particular, taking on a more environmental awareness, looking at the impact of industrial agriculture and industrial food systems in terms of reducing biodiversity on a vast scale throughout the world, and how it was causing various species, local and otherwise, to be threatened with extinction. So that represented in the 1990s a major expansion of their focus, and what started to give them a much more global reach. This expansion of their focus was then accompanied by a global mobilization through the formation of slow food chapters and food communities around the world. And I want to go into that at the moment, but let me pause here and ask if there are any questions that anybody has at this point. I've got much more detail to provide in terms of what slow food does, but if there are issues at the more general level at this point, then let me know. Sarah, are there any questions that you've fielded so far?
You know, questions that are here, I think that we could wait until the end.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that would be good if somebody wants to put up the hand and speak to something specifically that you're saying. But I think that we can wait till the end. Okay, great.
All right. Then I will move into the point about global mobilization. The basic unit of the slow food movement is called the convivium, which in normal English would be called the chapter, which is a locally organized community group that embraces the slow food philosophy and principles and engages in action to pursue that vision. And just to give you a sense of how dramatic the expansion of slow food has been, look at the map on the right. Every dark gray shaded area is a country where there is a component of the slow food movement. So that adds up to more than 160 countries and about 1,600 chapters and food communities in those countries. So that is truly a global presence for this movement. It is worth noting that this is the result of individual initiatives inspired by what was going on in the slow food movement elsewhere, and not a kind of large-scale organizing effort emanating from the slow food organization more generally. Virtually all of the chapters and communities are just organized by people deciding that they want to create something of that sort, and that there is a good local reason for doing so. In the US, there are now more than 150 chapters in 35 states, and in Florida there are 5 chapters: Orlando, Jacksonville, Stewart, Pembroke Pines, and Miami. I should also note that there is a student chapter at FIU, which is currently in a state of suspended animation thanks to the pandemic. So I will be looking for a new group of students next year to help me revive it. And in the U.S., there are several universities that have developed slow food chapters. As far as I know, FIU is the only one in Florida. I could be wrong about that, because part of the slow food situation is that typically a lot of activity is just local, and we don't really know what's going on in the chapters that are a little further away. All right, so that's the scale of mobilization. Now let me turn to a couple of the major initiatives that have been created by the slow food movement, and this does come out of the International Organization of Slow Food. As it expanded and followed up on this effort to identify specific foods that represented local and cultural communities throughout the world, they got the idea that it would be good to create a catalog of such items. And so the Ark of Taste, suggesting that the Ark is where we store all of these items, was created to accomplish that. Of course, it is not a physical Ark, it is an online catalog. But it is intended to encourage communities everywhere to preserve the basis for these products, whether that be seeds or other forms of ensuring that they don't disappear. And so the catalog is now quite large, including 5,500 products from 150 countries. And I'll give you a couple of examples of items in the Ark of Taste in just a moment. Along the same lines, but at a higher level of organization and effort, are the Presidia, which are organizing local producers that are associated with particular foods. So let's say there might be an item in the Ark of Taste that is still being produced in particular places by local communities, but is at risk. The Presidia is a network for producers to work together to try to preserve those products that are at risk of extinction, preserve traditional processing methods, and so forth. Globally, there are now more than 500 Presidia. In the US, sadly, there are only 6, and I will provide you with a couple of examples of those in a moment. All right. So both of these are large-scale efforts to actually follow up on this effort of identifying and protecting local foods and practices. Okay, here are a couple of arc of taste examples, and the first one is the Seminole pumpkin, and this fits right in with the introduction that noted that Miami-Dade as well as FIU sit on land that was once occupied by Native American groups. And this is actually unlike the others I'm going to show, is actually a product that it comes from this region because hard-shell squash were one of the only food products that were actually domesticated in North America before the arrival of domesticated products from elsewhere in the world, thanks to European colonization. Although some of the foods of the U.S. actually diffused up from Mesoamerica before the arrival of the Europeans, so that some of the basic vegetables like corn and squash and beans had arrived before the Europeans did in the southeastern United States. But the Seminole pumpkin, back to that story, is a hard-shelled squash that is particularly well suited to South Florida. It is tolerant of heat, it is tolerant of drought, it is tolerant of insects, and one of the reasons for all of that tolerance is that it has an incredibly hard shell. The description of it out there in the larger world is it's so hard that it has to be broken by an axe. I'm not quite sure if that's true or not. I think you could probably break it with other items as well, but you can't just cut into it. And that hard shell is actually what makes it so resistant to the environment here in South Florida. And by the way, I should note that there is very little agriculture that thrives in South Florida under these conditions. So it is hard work to actually pursue sustainable agriculture in South Florida without the kinds of interventions that have made industrial agriculture so problematic elsewhere. Anyway, the Seminole pumpkin is out there. It is the part of the Miccosukee diet, and in particular, it is turned into pumpkin bread. So I would encourage anybody who can find it to sample it. It is in danger of some displacement because of the availability of canned pumpkin. And so that is a good example of how industrial agriculture and the industrial food systems have put products out there that are so convenient that people frequently abandon traditional ways of producing foods. The other arc of taste example that I wanted to just mention here is the Indian blood peach. I happen to love fresh peaches from the southeast, which are so rarely available. One of the sad things about peaches in Florida is that they almost invariably are brought in from California as rocks that occasionally soften and are edible. But until you have actually sampled a good fresh peach from Georgia or South Carolina, you haven't really tried a peach. And because of the unlike the Seminole pumpkin, the peaches are quite vulnerable to and don't travel well. So that is one reason why they aren't marketed more widely beyond the regions where they are produced. The Indian blood peach is one variant of the peaches, and of course, peaches in general were brought to the New World by the Spanish in the 1500s. And from Mexico, the fruit arrived in the southeastern United States and was grown by the Cherokees and the Creeks further north of here, up in Georgia and the Carolinas. And so it was, by the time the English arrived to impose themselves on the Native American groups in the mid-Atlantic area, this was a cultivation that was being pursued. Because of the particular vulnerability I mentioned of peaches, this is not a case where large-scale production displaced it, but there were other variants of peaches that are much more widely grown, that are perhaps productive or whatever. So you do not find Indian blood peaches commercially available anywhere, except perhaps in a farmer's market where somebody has brought in local produce from their own farm. So it's worth seeking out if you are fortunate, but not really something that you can easily find. It requires dedication and sustained exploration of the peach areas of the Southeast. All right, now let me give you a couple of examples of Presidia. And as I mentioned, the Presidia are more organized efforts to protect particularly threatened food products. And both of these, again, are interesting examples of foods that were staples in the diet of Native Americans in different parts of the country. And interestingly, both were arrived through the influence of the Spanish early on. It's an interesting story for those of us that are interested in the kind of history of the distribution of agricultural products, how the presence of the Spanish in the Americas, in particular in Latin America, resulted in so much exchange of foods that are now staples in many parts of the world. So from the Americas, the Spanish brought back potatoes and corn and tomatoes and chili peppers and a variety of other things, and they brought with them livestock and potatoes. I'm sorry, livestock and European fruits and vegetables that then found their way into the food chains of various areas. The other thing that they accomplished was actually connecting various parts of the Americas. So the potato had originated in South America, was unknown in North America until the Spanish brought it up, but then it was enthusiastically adopted because potatoes everywhere are easy to grow and quickly become staples of diets where they're available. This particular potato was one of, and of course there are a vast number, dozens if not hundreds of kinds of potatoes that come out of Peru and South America. This is one of them that was brought up to the Americas by Spanish explorers, and was grown by one particular Native American group, the Makah Nation, which inhabits the very northwesternmost part of the continental United States. That is, it is on the part of Washington that sticks right up there next to Vancouver and British Columbia on the Canadian border. And they occupied this area, and this was the only place where the Makah Ozette potato was grown. Again, this is a product that was threatened by the increase of commercialization of agricultural products more generally, and the availability of potatoes as relatively cheap food items. And so this product by the I don't know, 20 or 30 years ago was starting to become rare. And the Macao-Zet potato Presidium was established to promote the preservation of this item through a network of local producers. And only very recently has it been grown outside the Macau Nation, although as far as I know, it's only still grown in the state of Washington. And there is very limited commercial production of the potato, although by all accounts, it is a particularly tasty version of the potato. On the right is another example of a presidium, the Navajo churro sheep. And again, this is a product that was brought by the Spaniards centuries ago to New Mexico in this case. And this was a sheep that was particularly well adapted to the environment of the southwestern United States. And for the Navajo and Pueblo peoples, it provided an excellent source of lamb and high quality wool, and was an important part of their cultures. But, as so often has been the case, the introduction of other breeds as the Southwest was settled and developed by people coming in from elsewhere in the United States, the breed was almost driven extinct, even though the other breeds that were being introduced were regarded as far less desirable in terms of the meat and the wool than was coming out of the Navajo churro sheep. So it was almost extinct by the 1980s, at which point an effort was to restore the breed was established, and there are now some 5,000 or more Navajo churro sheep on ranches in the Navajo and Pueblo regions. So it appears to be making a comeback, although again, this is not a product that is likely to be distributed more widely beyond the area where it inhabits. All right, so those are some examples of the kinds of issues that the focus on products and biodiversity has generated. I want to return now to the slow food movement, and again, one of the more interesting and dynamic aspects of this movement is that it is constantly creating networks and connections. Excuse me. Constantly creating networks and connections among the participants in the movement throughout the world. And one of the biggest of these is called Terra Madre, which was a specific effort designed to pull together the communities and convivia that had been multiplying around the world and give them a chance to connect with each other and learn from each other. And there are a variety of activities and ways in which this is done, but one of the most visible is a biannual fair that they hold in Italy for network members from around the world. And I have a video that I hope you'll be able to see here that is a very short one. It's a promotional video from the 2014 event. But if you look at it, you'll get a sense of both the enthusiasm and diversity of people and products that are identified with this movement. So Sarah, is it possible for you to roll that now?
Yes, okay. So I'm gonna stop sharing this for a moment, okay? And then I'll Okay, I'm gonna play now.
Looks good.
So I'm going to put your. That was a great video, by the way.
Okay, yeah, the sound was a little rough, but I see somebody has become hungry, and yes.
Sorry about the sound. I should have been on Chrome, and then that would have made it better, but I was on Firefox.
Well, it accomplished its purpose, which is what I really wanted you to see was, first of all, this is a very large-scale gathering. It also has a great deal of diversity there in terms of people and products from around the world. And you might wonder, not just everybody can travel to Italy for a week-long event in every 2 years in October. And so Slow Food is very cognizant of the need to provide a subsidized base to have wide-scale participation from throughout the world, in particular from less developed countries or and poorer communities and so forth, because the whole point is to demonstrate the significance of locality and small-scale production, not large-scale agriculture and food production. So they have a fairly elaborate way in which the participants are funded to come for this conference through the fees that are charged to the people that are actually there as spectators. But it is not primarily designed for the spectators. It is designed to bring together these various food communities and organizations to learn from each other and to inspire each other in terms of the kind of work that they are doing. So I have never been so fortunate as to actually go to one of the Terra Madre gatherings, but I'm sure that I will get there one of these days. And by the way, one of the things that I do regularly is take students to Italy in the summer to an FIU center in Genoa. And while I have been out of business for last year and this year, thanks to the pandemic, I am very much planning to be back next year, and would love for any of you that might be coming to FIU, or even if you're not at FIU, you can still enroll in that program. So that's just a small plug for study abroad and the opportunity to appreciate some of these food characteristics of Italy up close and personal. All right, so let me move on here. So this is something that I wanted to make sure that was included in the discussion here, and to the point that I actually shared a video in what was distributed ahead of time. So I hope some of you had a chance to see that video on whiteout pastures in Georgia. That did get out, correct, Sarah?
I wasn't sending that to my students. It was for the moderator.
Oh, okay. Well then,
yeah, but no, they didn't.
Then I would very much encourage well, we should share the link to that particular video. But in any case, let me back up for a moment. I'm sure all of you have heard, if not been engaged with the topic of the unsustainability of meat production and consumption, both in the United States and worldwide. The figure on the right of the slide shows you the projection of how meat production will have increased by more than tenfold in the course of a century between 1950 and 2050. And the general feeling of those of climate scientists and so forth is that this is completely unsustainable, and that the system is likely to break down before we ever get to that 500 million ton mark. But the basic point is that meat production and consumption have been growing at a huge pace, and in ways that are unsustainable for the climate, with negative consequences for the planet, and not to mention that billions of animals raised in the industrial food system have very poor life conditions. The animal welfare of animals in the industrial food system is abysmal. So the Slow Meat campaign that Slow Food has organized, along with many others, I should add, aims to raise awareness about better, cleaner, fairer consumption habits. And I'm going to say something about that in just a moment, because I realize I didn't mention the actual slow food principles that just enumerated, to encourage a reduction of meat consumption and promote the work of small and medium-scale producers who respect animal welfare. The general mantra here is eat much less meat, but of better quality if you are going to eat it. That is meat that has been produced under the conditions of the conditions of the kind that I'm describing here. The example of whiteout pastures in Bluffton, Georgia is just an amazing one. I've actually visited them last year. It is a sort of medium-sized ranch operation in southern Georgia that up until, I don't know, 15 years ago or so, was a traditional producer of meat on the industrial model. But the owner of the White Oak Pastures had an epiphany at that point and decided that he did not like what he was doing. He didn't like what was happening to the animals. He didn't like what was happening to his community, which was declining in terms of its economic base and so forth. And so he decided that he would radically alter the production system and bring it all in-house, so that White Oak Pastures raises diverse species together in natural settings and in ways that are carefully calculated to not only protect but enhance the environment. And this is a particularly interesting fact, is that the carbon footprint of White Oak Farms, White Oak Pastures rather, is actually negative. That is, the animals that they produce, and I'm sure most of you know that animals, or I should say livestock raising in general, is a producer of greenhouse gases because it reduces the vegetation on the one hand, and the animals themselves emit gases on which, if raised on a large scale, are significant. The model of White Oak Pastures is actually one that the ways in which they raise their animals in a particular cultivation strategy results in negative emissions, so that in the White Oak Pastures enterprise, they actually sequester more carbon than are emitted by the animals that they grow there. So I don't have time to go further into that, but it's important to note because that is an example of how farming that is respectful of environmental conditions, not to mention animal welfare, etc., can actually thrive. If you go to their website, you can actually order online from White Oak Pastures. The meat is not inexpensive, but it is not prohibitive in some areas, and actually become more widely distributed. You can find meat from White Oak Pastures not only in Whole Foods but in Publix, if you look carefully in the areas where that is where such products are shelved. All right, so that's slow meat. And now let me turn to slow fish. Before I do that, let me just mention that I should have had a slide on the 3 principles of the slow food movement, the principles for quality, which is really a guiding strategy that for all slow food organizations to follow. And it basically, there's 3 principles. One is that food should be good, another that it should be clean, and another that it should be fair. By good, it means that food should have an identifiable flavor that is authentic and that you are able to know what you're eating, and natural, that minimizes the use of elements that are extraneous or artificial in the system or the environment or in the processing of foods. Clean means that the food should be sustainable with regard to the environment, that agricultural methods, areas of production, forms of transport, biodiversity, ecosystems are all taken into account to be minimally damaging, and that agriculture needs to be deindustrialized. And finally, food should be fair, that it should be socially sustainable, meaning that there is social justice for those who work the land, and economically sustainable, so that there are fair trade principles with equitable returns to those that are producing it, and the availability of investment capital to farmers to actually be able to organized small farms, which throughout the world has been problematic with the expansion of large-scale farming over the last 2 centuries, basically. All right, so slow fish applies those principles to fishing and is also based on the observation that our just like our use of natural resources on the land has depleted many things, the stocks of fish are threatened by overfishing, by pollution, etc., and that we need a proactive campaign to protect fish as a source of nutrition. So there are some principles that regard the slow fish movement, but I will note that a slow fish festival is held every spring in Genoa, Italy. But in 2016, they actually brought it to the United States and held it in New Orleans. And we were able to arrange for some FIU students to work there as volunteers and participate in the festival as with sponsorship from the university. So that was a big moment for those students. Not only did they get to experience slow fish, they got to experience New Orleans, which is a treat in and of itself. All right, so how am I doing on time, Sarah?
I think we should wrap it up in a minute or so, and then
okay, I'll move along then I'll move along through the last few slides here. All right. Okay. Another important initiative is that Slow Food founded the University of Gastronomic Sciences in the town of Bra, outside of Torino, in 2004. And it is particularly worthy of looking into for those of you that are interested in food studies, because they offer undergraduate and graduate degrees in a particular model that combines humanities and sciences and firsthand experience in terms of raising raising crops, raising animals, and producing artisanal food. So it is a wonderful program. I was fortunate to visit there in 2019. And you'll see on the photograph on the right that I actually got to meet Carlo Petrini on that particular visit. My students were not too far away in that photograph there. All right, so this is something I just want to emphasize here as a large-scale analysis of what's going on. The slow food is a model of social change that has some critics of it, and I'll mention some criticism in just a moment, but it is a particular strategy. To begin with, it opposes the global industrial food system, which I pointed out in various ways, so I won't dwell on that. And then it promotes new food systems that are good, clean, and fair through education and action of various kinds. The vision of how this will actually affect social change is that large-scale change will occur as the gradual product of small-scale organizing of individuals and communities who choose to opt out of the global food system and adopt the slow food approach. Rarely is this a confrontational strategy, which many social movements inevitably adopt because they are confronting social injustices and political obstacles of one sort or another, and it's hard to avoid confronting them if you want to change them. But this is a vision of how social change will accrue as more and more people adopt this particular strategy. It is not all at once. It is not easy to opt out of the global food system except gradually. And so the proof is in the pudding, I guess I would say, and one can decide whether or not this seems to be working. The criticisms of slow food, I've just got 2 more slides, so I'll zip through this. Criticisms of slow food that have come from various quarters. First, it's more about rhetoric than substance. This is a quote from one critical article: "A gourmandizing fan club for celebrity food personalities and their followers." And this critique essentially lumps slow food in with what the emergence of foodieism, one might say, of the celebration of chefs and recipes from around the world, and not a serious effort to change, but just a kind of exoticism of what is being promoted. Second, that slow food promotes culinary Ludism. The Luddites, as some of you are probably familiar with, were a group of workers in 19th century Britain, early 19th century Britain, who broke into factories and destroyed machines as a way of trying to block the Industrial Revolution. And in this sense, the notion is that slow food is doing the equivalent sort of thing by opposing the industrial food system, because the industrial food system provides cheap food for the masses. And indeed, that is what it is designed to do and has been doing for the last couple of centuries, but with huge negative consequences on a variety of fronts. Third, that this is an elitist movement, and fourth, that it is promoting imperialist nostalgia, romanticizing peasant traditions rather than practical solutions to current issues. I personally think that most of these critiques are overdrawn, but occasionally they probably do apply to one or another manifestation of the slow food movement. So finally, to sum up, I think that slow food is an extraordinary story of a social movement that began with a small demonstration and has grown into a global force. That despite its immense size and scope, it has never been a centralized effort, but the secret of its success is that it has remained a loose network of activists and groups who are not dependent on the larger organization of the movement. It has benefited from a growing global awareness of the threats of climate change, environmental degradation, and natural resource insecurity. So clearly, there are many groups and organizations and ideas circulating that have aligned them, that have aligned with the kinds of slow food principles here. A note on COVID-19, that has had a huge impact on slow food as it has on everybody else. And in particular, slow food chapters many have had to temporarily suspend their work, because this is a movement that depends on people getting together and doing things together. And while some chapters have found ways to actually address issues raised by the pandemic, it's going to take some time to rebuild membership and local programs out of this. Although I think after, as long as this has been going on, it's not going to go away. It just needs to some time to recover. And finally, my last point would be that the need for slow food and other related efforts to remake food systems in ways that are sustainable, equitable, and culturally appropriate has never been greater, so that we can take inspiration from this story. So with that, I will close. The last slide has some resources that you can check out at whatever point you have access to them.
I will post. I'll post this presentation on our class too, so we can look at those resources. But I would also like to just ask everybody who's here to scan their phone over the QR code, do this quick survey, which is a requirement of Humanities Edge. So if you could do that, that would be most helpful. And while you are doing that, Mike, did you want to field some questions or
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, great.
Well, I guess if I could start, you had kind of hinted at this before, but I was wondering if you might elaborate on how the slow food movement connects with other social movements, such as animal rights or environmental justice.
Well, it very much connects with them, and again, because this is a movement that is not highly centralized in terms of what people are actually doing, that takes place at the local level. So virtually all slow food chapters that are doing anything worthwhile are connecting with other local organizations on these kinds of issues. And it's one of the things that makes the movement resilient, I think. If it were just operating on its own, it would not have anywhere near the kind of impact that it has had. But I guess the basic point is that it's more a matter of local initiative than central strategy.
Thank you. Somebody was asking to see the resource slide. I think we have that up there now.
By the way, I want to mention on the resource slide, the Slow Food Story is a great feature-length documentary film. Unfortunately, I don't think it's readily available on the net, except FIU has it in its library, so it can be streamed if you are within the FIU system. But I would encourage anybody who can hunt for it and find it to watch it, because it is provides some great local flavor in terms of how the movement got its start.
Great. We have just like 2 minutes before the class period ends. I see Steve's got his hand up, but I wonder if you could just talk about the slow food movement and individual enjoyment, like food as vital for our own, not just our health and well-being, but in terms of enjoyment, community, fun, and all of that.
Yes, actually, I didn't mention that, but that is an important principle of the slow food movement, and it's referred to basically as that food should be a source of pleasure, and it should be a source of pleasure for everyone. Carlo Petrini made that proclamation at a meeting of global environmental organizations in Italy, I don't know, a couple decades ago, and was practically run out of the place because that was regarded as a kind of self-indulgent notion in the midst of all the serious threats that we're facing the planet. But his idea basically is that we should be able to take pleasure in food, and that we often don't because of the ways in which our diets and access to particular products have been altered over the years. So that refers to local cultures, it refers to family traditions, and it refers to the particular products that have long been associated with particular locations or communities that have begun to disappear. So that is, there's a lot more to be said about that, but the notion of taking pleasure in food is fundamental, and that pleasure comes from knowledge of knowing what you're eating and the circumstances under which it has been produced and from whence it came, and also that it has been generated with the kind of attention to these principles that I was mentioning a moment ago.
Yeah, and I guess ethically harvested by people who enjoy what they do too, right? So there's this enjoyment feature throughout, and I guess we have room for time for maybe one more question. Steve, I'm
sorry I didn't leave more time for questions, by the way, so that's I wasn't quite sure how long this would last, but anyway, go ahead.
Thank you for this great presentation on slow food and how important it is to community building. I did put my comment in the chat about and I'm sure you mentioned it, but the aspect of the ancestral narratives that are shared in the process of slow food, growing, preparing, eating together, and how necessary it is for us to connect with ancestral storytelling that we want to keep going. Could you say a bit about that?
Well, that is clearly part of the focus on what kinds of food should be preserved and promoted. A great deal of it has to do with locality and the notion of cultural communities that are associated with localities. Of course, we live in a world in which global mobility has changed that dramatically. So it takes different forms in different places. But I think one of the interesting ways of thinking about slow food in Miami, which is a community in which there are very few actual traditional foods beyond a handful of Native American products that are actually part of a long-running tradition, and almost everything has been brought in from somewhere else by the people who have moved into Miami from all the other places. And so there are lots of cultural communities in Miami where the kinds of foods that are associated with communities of origin, or perhaps have even been developed here in particular immigrant communities, are worthy of celebrating along the same lines. But again, following the principles that of sustainability and access and social justice, etc., that are fundamental here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, there's so many more questions and connections to be made. I was thinking about, civil disobedience as well, and in terms of the food that you eat, resisting the status quo through the food that you eat. And
right.
It's subtle but really impactful. But unfortunately, I think we're out of time, and I don't want to keep the students longer than 12:30. So I'd like to.
Sarah, can I put in just a brief plug that I'm hoping that some of you will be coming to FIU in the near future. And we have a new bachelor's in global studies in my department that is now going to encompass the majors of anthropology, geography, and sociology, as well as an interdisciplinary major. That I think will prove very attractive for anybody that's interested in the kinds of issues we've been talking about here. Since I'm the undergraduate program director, I would be happy to field inquiries about that. We're rolling it out for implementation this summer. So it will take the place of our old degree programs.
Thank you. That's great.
Anyway,
that's wonderful.
It has been a pleasure to spend some time with you, and I'll look forward to continuing the conversation in one way or another somewhere else.
Well, you're getting lots of love in the chat. Okay, lots of appreciation. So you might just want to have a look. I think it was so enlightening, and I just really enjoyed that. And it made me wonder if we can have a slow food kind of satellite chapter at MDC that's connected to FIU. Maybe we can talk about that another time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, as I said, we're currently in abeyance, but I'm hoping I can revive it this fall.
Okay, thank you so very much, and thank you for everybody for coming. Brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
And thank you, Sarah, for organizing.
Yeah, and thank you, Earth Ethic Institute.